Okay, once again, we are going through the Reality of God series. This is week 3 of Stephen Hemler's book of the same title. Once again, our goal is to see things anew and then share it, realizing how much God loves us, that He does all this for us.
A renewed emphasis on apologetics. You know what apologetics is, everybody? It's the art of credibly, convincingly, and compellingly defending and presenting our faith. Now, I see so many brother priests whom I admire and have such fond and grateful thoughts. I see you out there tonight. You'll back me up on this story because it happens almost every year about this time, all right? Every year about this time, after Sunday Mass, we priests are going to meet a couple that we know who will come up to us and is going to tell us the same story. The couple's son or daughter just left and went to college about a month ago, all right? And let me give you my example of how it occurred. They come up to me and they say, Cardinal, we're down. We sent our boy to Catholic school. We baptized him. He was sent to Catholic school from kindergarten through high school. We never missed Sunday Mass. We take our faith seriously. He went off to college a month ago. We called him this morning, and in our conversation, as good parents do, we asked him if he had been to Sunday Mass, and he said, oh no, my roommate invited me to his church because we sat up all night last week, and he told me how wrong and misguided my Catholic faith is. What did we do wrong, the parents will say to me. And I ask, what do we as a church do wrong? We have failed to equip our young people, ourselves, with the art of credibly, convincingly, and compellingly defending and presenting our beloved faith. That roommate's congregation did not. He was well up on apologetics. So we need a renewed sense of apologetics.
So if anyone would know, Cardinal Dolan Wood, he was in charge of the USCCB, the United States Catholic bishops, and he's seen the numbers, the CARA reports that we do. I'd like to point out that it's not even the saddest story that we could hear. He talked about how the son was at least going to someone else's church. The stories that have come to me, the stories that I know about, the young adult, the adolescent, doesn't even want to go to church anymore. They don't even necessarily believe that there is a God, and if there is, they're not sure that his son is Jesus Christ. So the idea that this young adult was still Christian is at least a glimmer of hope.
Leonard, where do you stand on the anthropic principle?
Interesting question. On the one hand, I always
You don't even know what it is, do you? The anthropic principle states that if we wish to explain why our universe exists the way it does, the answer is that it must have qualities that allow intelligent creatures to arise who are capable of asking the question, as I am doing so eloquently right now.
I know what the anthropic principle is.
Of course, I just explained it to you. Now, where do you stand on it?
Where do you stand on it?
Strongly pro.
That I believe that God created the world in 6 days, and on the 7th, he made you to annoy me.
Hey, guys.
Yeah, Raj, where do you stand on the anthropic principle?
I'm all for it.
Attaboy.
Well, hang on. Why do you believe that he knows what it is and I don't?
Oh, Leonard, let's not take a saw to the branch we're sitting on, shall we?
So that's quite cute. They throw around some big words like the anthropic principle, which anthropic is just Greek for meaning human. So this anthropic principle is just the idea that we can see the clues in nature, that there's design, that there is a creator. And I think this is a good reminder that we don't have to wrap our minds around everything, even though the one guy said he knew what he was talking about. I'd say grab the low-hanging fruit and remember don't take this stuff too seriously. There's no test afterwards. We're just a tiny little speck on a speck within a speck, and now we know that there's billions of universes out there. So this idea, wrap our mind around a tiny bit of it, is an impossibility. That's why we leave it to God. What we're going to go over this week is, since the beginning of time, the universe has been governed by laws of nature, ordered and predictable laws captured in physics, many which contain constants, which are fixed number values that are used in mathematical formulas by scientists that we don't need to even know what they mean. But E equals mc squared is a very beautiful and elegant formula, I'm told. The E is energy, M is mass, and the constant is the speed of light. That C stands for constant. So this week, the author of this book wants to point out a few things. This week we'll focus on what are called these universal constants, and even more specifically how they all appear to be finely tuned, almost like a musical instrument. These tuned universal constants can't even vary more than a minutia either way, and there's a whole bunch of them. So that means we're piling on a razor's edge another razor on top of another razor, with very small variances in allowance for humans to be on a planet that's habitable. More than just the fundamental forces of nature are finely tuned, though. Scientists estimate there are also over 20 constants and even more cosmological parameters. So cosmology is just talking about space, or these initial conditions. There's things that have to be set in place for life to come about. They're finding that each of these extinctions we've had throughout history have actually left things on the earth that if they weren't there, subsequent life could not have existed. So science is proving more and more that everything, even the things that look catastrophic, have a purpose. And if they didn't happen, we wouldn't be here. So for example, what they call the cosmological constant, which has a funny history. Albert Einstein didn't like the idea of an expanding universe because that means there would have to be a creator, that at one point there was an initial starting point. He created this cosmological constant to negate gravity so that there would be no movement. But he found out he was wrong, and now they use the cosmological constant to describe the expansion speed in the universe. So if space expands too fast, the universe spreads out too quickly for material objects to form. And in reverse, if it's too slow, we run into the same ultimate dilemma of no stars, no galaxies, not even planets would exist. If it was too slow, the universe would collapse in on itself, and it was too fast, it would spread out and fizzle. So, I have all these grains of sand up on the screen, and I'm going to read you something from a scientist who used the sands on beaches as their example. So here are some fine-tuning ideas for you. It turns out that the rate of expansion of the universe right after the Big Bang, if it had varied by as little as 1 part in a quintillion. I had never even heard of a quintillion until I read this. A quintillion is 1 with 18 zeros after it. The universe would have continued to expand or collapse as we would not have the world we live in. So Laura Danley of the Griffith Observatory gives us an analogy so that we can wrap our mind around what a quintillion is. To illustrate just how 1 part in a quintillion is, imagine all the grains of sand in all the world's beaches. That number is probably somewhere around a quintillion. In this analogy, if all the sands represented the rate of expansion in the universe right after the Big Bang, she asks, how many grains of sand do you think you would need to add or subtract to wreck the universe? To either not expand and collapse in on itself, or to go too far and fizzle out? And her answer is just 1 grain. So just 1 point in that 1 quintillion, that's how precise things had to be for us to be here. just on one of the constants. That's just the expansion of the universe. There's many more that contribute to life, a life-bearing planet.
From galaxies and stars, down to atoms and subatomic particles, the very structure of our universe is determined by these numbers. These are the fundamental constants and quantities of the universe. Scientists have come to the shocking realization that each of these numbers has been carefully dialed to an astonishingly precise value, a value that falls within an exceedingly narrow, life-permitting range. If any one of these numbers were altered by even a hair's breadth, no physical, interactive life of any kind could exist anywhere. There'd be no stars, no life, no planets, no chemistry. Consider gravity, for example. The force of gravity is determined by the gravitational constant. If this constant varied by just 1 in 10 to the 60th parts, none of us would exist. To understand how exceedingly narrow this life-permitting range is, imagine a dial divided into 10 to the 60th increments. To get a handle on how many tiny points on the dial this is, compare it to the number of cells in your body, or the number of seconds that have ticked by since time began. If the gravitational constant had been out of tune by just one of these infinitesimally small increments, the universe would either have expanded and thinned out so rapidly that no stars could form and life couldn't exist, or it would have collapsed back on itself with the same result: no stars, no planets, and no life. Or consider the expansion rate of the universe. This is driven by the cosmological constant. A change in its value by a mere 1 part in 10 to the 120th parts would cause the universe to expand too rapidly or too slowly. In either case, the universe would, again, be life-prohibiting. Or, another example of fine-tuning. If the mass and energy of the early universe were not evenly distributed to an incomprehensible precision of 1 part in 10 to the 10 to the 123rd, the universe would be hostile to life of any kind. The fact is, our universe permits physical, interactive life only because these, and many other numbers, have been independently and exquisitely balanced on a razor's edge. Wherever physicists look, they see examples of fine-tuning. The remarkable fact is that the values of these numbers seem to have been very finely adjusted to make possible the development of life. If anyone claims not to be surprised by the special features that the universe has, he's hiding his head in the sand. These special features are surprising and unlikely.
So I had someone ask me, if this is the case, if we have all these universal constants and all these numbers are so finely tuned, then why do we have scientists who choose not to believe? From what I can see, based on what I read, scientists get very finely tuned themselves into the niche that they know, and they don't want to look outside of that niche to either side. So you almost have to stand back and see what the artist did with all of his brush strokes. You have to look at all these different things, and while I wouldn't recommend anyone memorizing any of these things, it still is utterly amazing to know that all these constants had to be very precise. And if you noticed in that second formula, not that you might have, but gravity was a part of the second one. It had 2 constants in it. And one of the things that's really amazing about all these universal constants and formulas is you see these constants all over the place being reused, almost like there was a design intended. The idea that people can overlook that these things are very precise, but they're also reused, like someone has created a tapestry, if you will, is beyond me. It says in the Bible that some people choose not to believe and resist the evidence that's all around them. So what's the point of being aware of these universal constants? They appear scary. I know they did to me when I first started looking at them. beyond understanding. Who understands 10 to the 10th to the 123rd? I mean, exponents I didn't like in the first place, and now I find out that exponents have exponents. I don't even know what that means. And they seem of little practical value, which I would agree with. I think this knowledge in $7 might get you a cup of coffee at Starbucks. I don't even know if $7 will get you a cup. But I know knowing these facts, even if you even if you memorize these, it's of little value other than by being aware of them. It's one more place you can point others to who have been led to believe science proves that there's no need for a God and that he doesn't exist. I think, and we started the first week with creation and cosmology, and I think that's always the best place to start, because even if they don't believe in God, even if they don't have a religion, everybody has to agree on the fact that we live in a universe. So the idea that we can talk about these constants and it's a place they can look up, I think is helpful. So this video I bring up because most scientists will say, hey, Hawking said this when he was in a debate, if you just give me a starting point, if you just give me space, time, and matter, I'll give you a universe that doesn't need God. Well, of course, because you just took the premise, the beginning, the formation of space, time, and matter, which was created at the Big Bang, and now you want to say, well, once I get the Big Bang, I can give you physics to prove all the rest of it. And when you add those all together, scientists call it chance. So I almost feel like chance is the god of science. If you don't know how to explain it, if you don't know what all the parameters are, or if you want to just point to an observation and say, see, that happened by chance. And I always tell my students, chance isn't a thing, it's an observation, or it's a fancy way of saying, I don't know, so it happened by chance. So chance isn't a little factory that brings things about.
And here we have rolled a 6. And here we have rolled a 3. I've gone and rolled a nice cheeky 2 here. Yep, that's a 4.
So he goes through all 9 ways and they become more and more bizarre, so I just cut it off there. But this teaches us 2 things. Number one, that kids in Great Britain have way too much time on their hands. I don't know that I would ever think of anything like that, but it also shows us what chance is. Chance is something that the parameters have set up the outcome for. So that die was created to have 6 equal sides. So chance tells us you have a 1 in 6 chance. But what if that die was created into, let's say, a rectangle? The odds of you ever rolling it and it standing on one end of the rectangle wouldn't be equal to having those longer sides. So if you start talking about chance like it's a thing, and like if you go long enough, chance will create something, you still have to have a creator that set the parameters. You still have to have the material. You still have to have the die, and you still have to have the person who rolls it. So if someone just tells you, if you give me a long enough amount of time and chance, anything can happen, it's untrue. I would argue that if there was a hurricane in Texas and there were a deck of cards up on top of a building and they blew off, they would not form a perfect card pyramid and stand. Like someone could say, well, there's no laws refuting that. So there is a chance, however remote that could happen. And I would have to say, no, No. Same with the universe. It's only 13.8 billion years old, and they talk about the things that needed to have happened for us to be here. Most of them, there's not enough time unless there was design.
How about chance? Did we just get really, 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 really lucky? No. The probabilities involved are so ridiculously remote as to put the fine-tuning well beyond the reach of chance. So, in an effort to keep this option alive, some have gone beyond empirical science and opted for a more speculative approach, known as the multiverse. They imagine a universe generator that cranks out such a vast number of universes that, odds are, life-permitting universes will eventually pop out. However, there's no scientific evidence for the existence of this multiverse. It cannot be detected, observed, measured, or proved. And the universe generator itself would require an enormous amount of fine-tuning. Furthermore, small patches of order are far more probable than big ones. So the most probable observable universe would be a small one, inhabited by a single, simple observer. But what we actually observe is the very thing that we should least expect: a vast, spectacularly complex, highly ordered universe, inhabited by billions of other observers. So even if the multiverse existed, which is a moot point, it wouldn't do anything to explain the fine-tuning.
So that just reiterates what I said. The idea that everything's balanced on a razor's edge and that we would have this perfectly ordered universe defies logic. We know that when we spill things, it becomes disordered. Nothing forms itself. I've never had that kind of luck. So I don't believe it's luck. So if none of this made sense because it was too sciencey, watch this. So that's what they want you to believe, right there. Not that someone set up all the dominoes, not that someone created a pattern. They want you to believe that all that stuff set itself up by random chance and moved backwards, became more ordered as time went on. I don't know about you, but I think the only way that can happen is because cameras are able to record things and then you can reverse them. So the God of scientism, and I don't want anyone to ever think that I'm against science, because I'm not, neither is the Catholic faith, but anytime you put an ism on the back of something, you have to start looking at the fine details. So this God of scientism is where space, time, and matter come together and chance makes something happen. Anytime my students hear that word, or I hear that word, I get a little nervous, because that just means they don't know what's going on, and it sounds good. So what does a fine-tuned universe get us? While all these incredible numbers cannot ultimately be proved to be caused by a creator, we didn't see him do it, our worldview, which comes from a book thousands of years old, does provide this. We do have a worldview that talks about this. No other worldview does, not scientism, nor materialism, not naturalism. None of those other isms can fit what's going on into a box. That's why they stick it in there and they cut off anything that looks like religion or God. And they stay inside that box to their detriment, because then they can't prove anything outside it. They have to keep saying the same thing over and over again, which is the God of chance. And science, as I said, isn't our enemy either. But science can't ever prove there is no God. There is no single explanation as to why everything is so finely tuned as to be sitting on a razor's edge, each number finely tuned. And think about it, all those numbers have to be multiplied together. That number is literally beyond comprehension. So you'd have to multiply that 10 to the 10 to the 123rd by that 10 to the 60th, and you have 20 some constants, and you have to multiply all those together, and that number, however astronomical it is, would be the number you would have to get one part in hope that that came by chance. So remember, God created us with us in mind before time began, and as Isaiah 44:24 says, and mind you, Isaiah was 700 years before Christ. Thus says the Lord your Redeemer, who formed you from the womb. I am the Lord who made all things, who alone stretched out the heavens, who spread out the earth. So here's some food for thought. Had you ever heard of apologetics before this series? We started out with Cardinal Dolan talking about it. It's surprising how many of us haven't. I talked to one gentleman who actually had it in high school, and he's about the only one I've found so far. And think about what Cardinal Dolan said regarding apologetics. Is it something that our church needs to start bringing to the forefront because our Protestant brothers and sisters are doing it? And I can tell you the Muslims are already doing it too. I've read a few books on Muslim apologetics, and if you don't know how to answer, it can be pretty intimidating. Have you heard the term chance before, used in common language as something that will eventually happen through some mechanism of chance? How many things in this video were you aware of that needed to be in place? I didn't know any of these before I started studying it. Not that I know what they are now, but I do know many things have to be in place for life to be even a remote possibility.
Now it's time to say goodbye to Jerry Long this evening. We would like to thank you folks for kindly dropping in. You're all invited back next week to this locality to have a heaping helping of their hospitality. Hillbilly, that is. Set us bell. Take your shoes off. So come back now, dear.